The Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. When evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. The other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Jesus is tired. Anyone would be. Before this lesson starts today, we heard that people are coming from everywhere, pouring out of the towns and cities to see him, to hear him, to touch him. The only way he could get room to breathe as he spoke to them was to get in a boat and to float just offshore. So at the end of the day, he's exhausted. "That's it," he says. "Let's head off to the other side of the lake." And the disciples, good friends that they are, see that here at last is something they can do for him. They might not know what he's been trying to say with all his parables. We heard about the clueless disciples last week or the week before. But they know about boats, and they can take him safely across the water. "Lay down and rest," they say. "Put your feet up, close your eyes. We can look after you now instead of you looking after us." So Jesus, exhausted, sinks down onto the cushion in the stern of the boat and falls asleep, while the disciples go on with doing what many of them do best. The Sea of Galilee is a second home to the fishermen in the group. It's where they make their living, where they grew up. We can imagine the first part of the journey. The sun is sinking towards the horizon. The water is lapping gently against the side of the boat, rocking Jesus as he sleeps. There's a ripple of wind on the sails. It's an idyllic scene. But suddenly, everything changes. A storm blows up. One of those sudden, serious storms that the Sea of Galilee is well known for. The waves that have been gently rocking the boat suddenly threaten to overwhelm it. The water is coming in faster than the disciples can bail it out. And Jesus is sleeping. Finally, the disciples can't stand it anymore. They wake Jesus up in a panic. "Teacher," they shout above the roar of the wind, "don't you care that we are perishing?" Jesus wakes up, rebukes the wind, says to the sea, "Peace, be still," and the storm dies down and there is complete calm. I need a drink. Oh, it has a convenient cup holder. Some of us know what storms are like. Storms on the sea or on land. I've been in a couple of doozies, one of them while I was on a lake in my life. We know what it feels like when a peaceful landscape or seascape is suddenly turned into a frightening and dangerous place by wind or rain or hail or snow. We feel powerless in the face of nature. Facing something so much stronger than ourselves, there's often nothing we can do but wait it out and see what happens. But this story isn't just about those kinds of storms, that level of violent weather that most of us experience only a few times in our lives. The real power of this story is in what it says about the other kinds of storms we face. the storms of illness or unemployment, the storms of relationship breakdown or the death of someone we love. Many of us have had that terrifying feeling of being powerless, out of control, in danger of being swamped, overwhelmed by the demands of our lives and the emotions we are experiencing. That's what the disciples are feeling as the storm rages around them. The boat hasn't sunk yet, but they can see that it's likely to, and there's nothing they can do about it. No wonder they're panicking. But what does their experience have to tell us that will help us when we face our own storms? What's the answer to that famous Lutheran question that we hear in the Catechism, what does this mean? Or, as one of my seminary professors liked to paraphrase, so what? This happened, so what? They responded, so what? Mark's gospel is short, but it's very carefully put together. He makes every word count, so it's important to look closely at the words he chooses. Does anyone remember what can I even pronounce it, onomatopoeia is? I'll bet that Mary remembers. I had to look it up when I read it in a commentary. It's a word that sounds like what it means. When Jesus says, peace, be still, the word for peace is shupa. Peace, Jesus says. If you listen, you can hear what it means. Jesus says, shupa. He says to the storm, shh, be quiet. He tells the storm to stop shouting. Because it isn't just the storm that's the problem. It's what the storm is saying to the disciples that causes them to panic. As the storm rages outside of them, another storm is raging within, shouting at them that they are useless, that they're failures, even at sailing. They're fishermen. They should have been able to cope with this storm. This is what they do. They should have seen it coming. They should have turned the boat. They should have this, they should have that. They had been so confident when they set out, but they couldn't even get this short journey right. The storm is telling them that they can't cope, that they are about to die, and worst of all, that they are alone. When they wake Jesus, they don't cry out, help us. No, their words are, don't you care? That's their worst fear. Not that they're drowning, but they have been abandoned. We probably all know what storm voices sound like. When things go wrong, what do we think? What do our inner voices say to us? What are the messages that shout the loudest? I must have done something to deserve this. I was so blind. I should have seen this coming. It must be my fault in some way. I'm useless, worthless, good for nothing. I always thought it, but now this proves it. And like the disciples, the storm's voices tell us that no one cares, that we are alone. These voices of blame, hopelessness, and abandonment sap our courage and our confidence. The things that we need most in the time of trouble. They may be voices we learned to hear in childhood, the critical voice of a family member, or they might be the voice of a teacher, or the voices we learned from an abusive spouse or employer. Either way, the voices that send us our message of fear and loneliness are deeply rooted. The fear that's attacking the disciples has equally deep roots, and Jesus knows it needs to be dealt with. Why are you afraid, he says to them. Not why were you afraid. Thinking you are drowning is bound to be frightening. But now, in the calm after the storm, Jesus knows that the fears they gave voice to in that desperate cry are still there, waiting to surface again when trouble strikes. It's not just the wind and the waves on the Sea of Galilee, but the storm voices in their hearts that need addressing. Because there will be plenty of storms coming for these disciples in the future, storms that will be equally terrifying. And there will be more storms in our lives. Where do we find the assurance that we're not alone? There's no shortcut, no easy way to get there. We can't avoid the storms. We have to find the courage to shout at God when it feels like God is sleeping. It isn't easy. The storms can rage so loudly that words like peace, be still, shopa, are lost and hard to hear. So we really have to listen. And you know what? You can't learn to listen in the midst of a crisis. You need to learn to listen ahead of time for the voice of God, so that when God speaks in this crisis, you'll know that it's God. You will hear that voice. You will recognize that voice. Is there a storm in your life today? Are there storm voices shouting inside you, telling you that you're powerless and alone? Shh. Peace be still, Jesus says to us. You are held in the everlasting arms of the Creator of the wind and sea, the one they will never defeat. Listen for the voice of Jesus. Every day, listen for God's voice. Because only then will you know that God cares about you in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of our lives. And you will be able to remember that and hear that voice when the storms come for you. Amen.